AI often proves its value first by making a company cheaper to operate. That is not the same as making the company larger. In customer support functions, routine interactions can be automated quickly enough for the savings to register inside the first reporting cycles. Fewer human-handled tickets, lower variable support cost, and favorable operating expense variance all create the impression that the deployment has changed the economics of the business. But when finance teams look for the second effect, higher gross margins, stronger revenue per customer, or durable expansion in transaction volume, the evidence often arrives later, weaker, or not at all. The reason is simple but frequently missed. Cost savings occur inside the workflow. Revenue expansion occurs in the market. One is controlled by the firm, the other is contested by competitors, customers, pricing pressure, switching costs, and imitation. Companies therefore model AI as delivering two benefits at once. The first benefit arrives on the cost line. The second benefit requires the market to respond favorably to whatever the lower cost enables. Most deployments prove only the first. The second remains conditional on conditions the deploying firm does not fully control. The modeling error appears when organizations assume the cost reduction will automatically improve margins or support revenue growth without separate tests for price stability and demand response. That assumption collapses when competitive response transmits the savings to customers before the firm can capture them as higher margins or volume. Consider the contribution margin on a single interaction. Price is set by market positioning. Variable cost falls with automation. If price holds, margin per interaction rises by the full cost reduction. If competitive pressure requires a lower price to defend share, margin per interaction rises by only part of the reduction, and total margin improvement depends on whether volume growth offsets the lower rate. The outcome therefore depends on price stability and volume elasticity, not on the cost reduction in isolation. This relationship shows why cost savings frequently register as operating expense relief without producing proportional margin expansion in consolidated results. The cost reduction also increases operating leverage by shifting cost structure toward lower variable expense. Higher operating leverage amplifies the profit impact of any revenue change, yet that amplification appears first as margin improvement on existing volume. It does not appear as revenue growth unless the deployment also changes customer behavior or pricing power. Legacy environments keep data, reconciliation, exception handling, and compliance steps in place even as automation volume grows. These steps convert intended variable savings into semi-fixed overhead because the systems that enable automation require ongoing data quality, model monitoring, and exception escalation that scale less than linearly with volume. Pilot environments limit the range of inputs and stakes. Production environments restore the full range. The net savings therefore narrow once the deployment leaves controlled conditions. The more the deployment resembles the real organization, the less it resembles the savings case used to justify it. Savings demonstrated under restricted input distributions often fail to survive contact with the actual distribution of customer interactions. The conversion of variable savings into semi-fixed overhead occurs precisely because the enabling infrastructure does not compress at the same rate as the automated workflow. Quarterly cycles reward visible cost variance because it can be explained within a single reporting period. Revenue expansion requires evidence of sustained change in customer behavior across multiple periods. This evidentiary asymmetry leads organizations to overweight cost containment in capital decisions while undertesting whether the same deployment shifts pricing power or demand. The cost benefit remains meaningful, but its strategic value depends on how much of it survives the systems and market around it. The improvement in contribution margin on existing volume remains real, yet that improvement does not automatically enlarge the volume or protect the margin rate against competitive response. Revenue expansion materializes when the capability creates outcome improvements customers value enough to pay more for or to increase their usage. This requires differentiation that rivals cannot match quickly at comparable cost. In most US markets, the differentiation erodes through imitation before revenue effects compound. Most deployments therefore deliver their primary economic effect through cost containment rather than through durable changes to the revenue function. Differentiation sufficient to support higher price or greater volume usually depends on data or process advantages that become less unique as adoption spreads. The advantage must last long enough for customers to change behavior before competitors erase the difference. The revenue effect appears reliably only where switching costs or data asymmetry slow competitive imitation long enough for the advantage to compound. The practical test is therefore not whether AI reduced cost. It is whether the firm retained the reduction after competitive response, integration burden, and quarterly reporting pressures are taken into account. Capital planning that treats cost savings and revenue expansion as automatic joint products misstates the conditions required for each. Initiatives justified primarily on cost containment require different return thresholds and monitoring intensity than those positioned to drive measurable shifts in pricing power or demand. The misstatement appears most clearly when return models assume both effects without testing whether price discipline or demand response actually improved. The durable margin gain from AI therefore depends on whether the cost reduction remains inside the firm or is competed away in the market. Lower operating cost is not the same as revenue expansion. A company can become cheaper to run without becoming harder to compete against. The difference matters because efficiency can improve reported performance while leaving the firm's market position unchanged. When that occurs, AI has not expanded the business. It has only made the existing business cheaper to serve.